refrained from going into this wider story, keeping to the instructions here and trying to respond to the basic questions in these 10-15 minutes. But you're very right that global economic crisis is something that we should all take into account as a very important factor, although in these weak countries with almost non-existing economies, the global economic crisis, doesn't hit very strong. It has nothing to hit, actually. The effects are more weaker, I would say, because we all hope for direct foreign investments and all these road shows that our politicians do. The promise that once we are a member of NATO, the investors would jump into Macedonia to invest, and all this story is something that keeps us alive and keep this hope alive. In reality, due to the economic crisis, the politicians are to some degree enforced to behave as pimps, as macros, and to offer their countries to the global market and to market it like we have these obedient workers. They don't ask for their human rights, their labor rights. They work for nothing, for peanuts. So you come invest in Macedonia. That is how our government tries to survive through these hard times. As for the United States, I would agree that they are here to stay. They are here to stay. They are in a shadow. They have nothing much to do now. But they have served as a crucial factor in the state building process in the previous years, including the state building of Kosovo, the Ohrid Framework Agreement, the Dayton Bosnia as well. So they have great stakes in this region. They would not leave it to Europe to do whatever she would do. And whenever there is a crisis, the US ambassadors are actually the crucial mediators in the internal crisis, trying to mediate between the ethnic leaders or political leaders. So they are here to stay, including all this intelligence infrastructure built in Skopje that serves the whole region. So I don't know, it is probably good news that United States are not visible. If I have to choose, it is for sure European Union that I would like to see more engaged. But it is still a fact that Macedonian governments, in plural, obey all demands from Washington, including the exception of US citizens and soldiers from the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, participation in all military missions that they demand, Macedonian flag to be there or participation. So we are quite obedient. We are here, they are here, so everything is okay. I think that the European Union, at least seeing what's happening in Ukraine, is still in the same capacity. United States are doing the mess, and European Union is going to do the dishes. That's how I see it.
Igor Jovanovski has a question. Okay.
I don't know. Don't worry.
We don't have.
Right, Igor Jovanovski from the Southeastern University. I have a question to Professor Dejanovic. You mentioned that we should always think about alternatives, to the EU or to any other political project, and I totally agree with you. I mean, I don't believe in the end of history thesis or whatever. But my point is, as the crisis of the euro or the sovereign debt crisis progressed, and as it was noticeable that it is hitting the periphery of the European Union mostly the southern countries, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy as well. Then some alternative views appeared in public. I don't know whether you've read Giorgio Agamben's ideas of Latin Empire, which were pretty much mocked in the beginning. I even don't get it when I read it for the first time, you know, but then I realized it's a very, very interesting idea. Basically what he argued is that the crisis of the European idea, the crisis of the European values, which were mostly the Anglo-Saxon ones, you know, it has something with the way the Southerners behave, you know. His idea was that Italy is slightly different than Germany, you know, and the way that Anglo-Saxon capitalism works is very detrimental to the values that the Italians share, you know, or the Spaniards, or the Greeks, for instance, or even the Balkans, because we are all also we are Southerners as well. So what would you say about this idea of, I'm not against destroying the EU, maybe I'm against recomposing the EU, of this idea of a Latin Empire, or if we put it in a Balkan context, what would you say of the idea to recompose the former Yugoslav spaces, because we obviously share the culture, it's pretty much obvious, we share the language, the songs, and we share nostalgic views of something, you know, we had before. So what would you say of this idea to recompose the European space, maybe not necessarily politically, but maybe culturally in a way, by abandoning slightly the Anglo-Saxon liberal universalism and addressing the cultural values of non-Anglo-Saxon and even the Balkan countries? Thank you.
Also, maybe we can connect with a few more.
So, but don't bring me the microphone, please. I will speak out. Bene, do you see, my question will not be as ontological as the predecessor, it's more up down to earth. Do you see a possibility for countries like Croatia and Slovenia, now in the EU, to do something about Bosnia, about Macedonia, and the smooth entry into the EU that you were mentioning?
Anyone else? Professor Mincha? Would you
Yeah.
like a microphone?
No, I don't. I'd like to say just 2 sentences about the assumption that the European Union should one way or another take our countries, because in or out they're not going to change, and it's better to be in rather than out. Having spent the last 7 years in the European Union, I haven't seen too much difference in my country, frankly speaking. And trying to look at the process from the perspective of the main countries in the European Union, and leaving apart idealism and liberalism, I don't see any rational argument why those countries should be taken as they are. Including Bulgaria and Romania, not only those who are not part of the European Union yet. Spain, Portugal and Greece were another story. It was the 70s and the 80s. There were only 3 countries. It was easy to assist them. And at the end of the day, it proved that they were not assisted so much properly. Look at what happens in Greece. There was a geopolitical value of integrating them, as there is geopolitical value of integrating Central and Eastern Europe. The problem is that taking all our countries in does not make the European Union neither richer nor more homogeneous, nor better strategic factor or from any other perspective. So our responsibility to change should not be transferred on the European Union. And last remark, I think that there are alternatives to the European Union for the governing regimes in our countries, not for the nations as such. Because for the nations, all other alternatives are not good enough, to say the least. But there are some alternatives for the governing regimes.
At least 2 questions were directly
directed to me, so I'll try to answer these two. Although I actually have also some ideas about the third one, but I'll leave this probably to others. To the first question about alternatives, I haven't read this particular one piece, and so therefore can't comment concretely on this idea. But I think the European history of the 20th century in particular is somewhere in between the empire approach and the nation-state approach. And of course we were all told in school, especially during socialist times when I was in primary school and the high school, no one has ever said a good word about an empire. And the empires were always associated with only negative consequences. And it was not before I actually arrived to Great Britain, or United Kingdom as it's called as well, to hear for the first time some alternative views on the empires, to be quite honest. And some of them were actually quite cynical, saying, look, this is your nation-state concept, transported from America through misunderstood self-determination, misread Woodrow Wilson, married and overtaken by Lenin and his idea of self-determination, and then Stalin with the right to secession, even the right to secession that he advocated in 1923, which quite amazing has survived in the minds of some of the recent political elites in post-Yugoslav states and post-Soviet states as well. But don't want to go too much into detail about this. But the argument then went saying, weren't empires better? Because they had managed, through illiberal means, nevertheless to manage conflicts and to secure some degree of heterogeneity and of recognition of different groups. And so, for example, if you look how many churches survived Ottoman times and compare how many mosques survived the area of nationalism in some of our countries, actually, you know, we have a lot to be ashamed of if we argue empires were only bad and nation-states were solutions. And of course, as we know, there was this Marxist alternative as well, which is neither a nation-state nor an empire. Actually, it was anti-imperialistic and it was anti-nationalistic. And it insisted on internationalism, where the state is not so important. And it could eventually be sidelined either through the global class solidarity or eventually one day with withering away of the state and so on and so forth. I think if the nation states, and I think also the European Union as a concept is somewhere there. We have mentioned Kant and so on. This is an alternative to nation states. It is an attempt to build a society of states, so a kind of international society. I mean, to go back to English school and international relations theory and so on. I think we need to think, if not anything else, about some of these alternatives. And to me, to be quite honest, the European Union is still useful. And I must admit that I actually think that the breakdown of the European Union might introduce war to Europe. I'm not, because you see, when I say war, somebody yesterday mentioned no one is thinking about this in Europe. Well, I'm not sure after the Ukrainian crisis that nobody in Europe is thinking that the war is impossible, that nobody is thinking the war is possible. I mean, look at Latvia and Lithuania and fears, even in, I think, Poland and so on. And we in Yugoslavia also back in 1988, 89 thought the war was absolutely impossible. And the wars do happen. And when they happen when there is a breakdown of international system. That's when the impossible becomes inevitable. And the inevitable becomes impossible. And the states actually appear when there is a breakdown of international system. So I think if the European Union collapses, it will encourage nationalism in a number of countries. It could be the cause of nationalism, but it could also be the reason for further nationalism in a number of countries. And we are in a very, very dangerous situation. So I sincerely hope the European Union will survive and will manage to somehow keep at bay local nationalisms. And that's why I want these countries to join in. It's imperfect, it is to be criticized, it's undemocratic, and actually it would have never happened had we asked people. And actually the art of politics in post-socialist countries was how to marginalize people from decision-making on the European affairs. And had it not been marginalized, in Croatia, 28% of the people of the total electorate voted in favor of the EU. We would have never become members of the European Union had we not managed somehow skillfully to marginalize that. So I'm a little bit worried about the inclusion of people in international politics. That's why we have secret diplomacy and serious people discussing this rather than people on the streets and so on. And the referendum is not always helpful, as we know, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go that much deeper. So I think we need to think along these lines in a way. I fear nationalism in Europe. I think it's not dead. And whenever we have the collapse of alternatives, either in the European Union or internationalism or imperialism, which is of course impossible to come back, but then it's there as the most potent power, and it can do a lot of damage, as we saw in former Yugoslavia. The collapsing of former Yugoslavia through introduction of democracy, at the same time, was a denial of the idea that democracies do not fight wars against each other. Well, imperfect democracies do fight wars sometimes, and every democracy is imperfect after all. So that's what I think. The renewal of Yugoslavia, I don't think it's possible. The countries, when they break down, they never come back. We may think this or that, and we should be allowed to think anything we want to protest, but I don't think it's a realistic option. But I think really that the something similar with the European Union, after all, is it is. And from this point of view, I really don't understand when Europe fears to take, let's say, Bosnia-Herzegovina in it. Bosnia-Herzegovina is not only a small Yugoslavia, it's also a small European Union. And if the European Union cannot handle or take a risk of taking Bosnia-Herzegovina in, and perhaps even transferring the capital city to Brčko, why not? Then, what is it all about? Is it so powerless to take a country in and then to kind of close down this issue and to offer security guarantees and to offer some hope and to actually make a big step? And I don't think, and I think to my question, why would they take, to the question posed, why would the European Union take these countries? Why not? When we ask the question, why not, we hear a lot of stereotypes and prejudice. These countries are not ready, this and that, and they're not equal something. But most of this is really, I think, coming from the nationalist or kind of xenophobic side of part of Europe. And of course, I think we need to somehow manage this. Okay, what was this other question? Croatia, Slovenia, what can they do? These are small countries, of course, but are members of the European Union. And I think Croatia has already officially proposed a separate road for Bosnia-Herzegovina, so that the country starts negotiating, and then during the negotiation process, it actually, so that the beginning of negotiation process is not conditioned upon fulfilling any criteria, so that we start, and that in itself is something. Personally, but this is strictly personal, I would like to see more than that. But at least I think official Croatia is aware of a need that this process doesn't stop and it gets speeded up. For different reasons. I mean, Croatia is a country with 1,300 kilometers borders. Do we want a Chinese wall there in between EU and non-EU forever? Do we want to be the guardians of European border forever? Well, half of Croatia does want that. They believe this is the role of Croatia, historically and at present, and they think of themselves in military terms as guardians of Europe and conservative terms, and we are better than them, we belong, they don't, and so on and so forth. The other half of Croatia, which at the moment is official Croatia, believe this is dangerous for Croatian national interests, and therefore supports a quick accession, as quick as possible. And what do I mean by quick? And I'll finish with this, sorry. And I mean by quick in democracy, anything that is within 8 to 10 years from now. Why? Because in democracy, politicians think about their term in office, and they don't think about what will happen afterwards. And they are ready to do things only if they can see that they themselves will have some direct benefit out of that under their watch. That is, 1 term in office or 2 terms in office. If you tell them in 20 years, they will say, I can't care less. For better or worse, I will take debts to this country so that I'm good, and in 20 years' time, I'm going to repay them, I don't care. Only authoritarian leaders have plans for 20 years, because they believe they will be in power for 20 years. But democratic leaders, anything that is beyond 10 years is absolutely, you can't get them interested. So therefore, the realistic perspective is 8 to 10 years.
Thank you. Professor Sofas.
Yes, I just wanted to return to the question about Agamben's geopolitical imagination. Maybe I think that that's why I mentioned speech in the beginning, because I think this is a very, it's playing with homogenizing different societies and also essentializing cultures. And I wouldn't have expected to see that text, actually, because I think because it's very similar to talking about Balkan exceptionalism. And I don't think we should be talking in these terms. Just another issue, however, because he raised an issue about I would say, pervasiveness of Anglo-Saxon neorealism in the thinking of the European Union. And I think he's not the only one who's thinking about that. And with discussions I had with politicians in Finland and Sweden and even Denmark, which I consider to be not as, I would say, far from neoliberalism, and even if the Swedish government is a neoliberal government in many respects, you can hear this kind of anxiety about the rampant, I would say, expansion of the neoliberal logic as expressed by Britain in European Union thinking. I mean, Britain may not be influential in other aspects, but I think in pushing for reforms of neoliberal kind of emphasis and so on, it has achieved a lot, and a lot of Scandinavians, at least, are very concerned about this kind of emphasis. Just that.
Anyone else from the panel to reflect? Egert Harten has a question. Can you pass the microphone?
But you can hear me like that? Yeah. It's probably for the taping. Good. It's for Mr. Jovic. I would like you to go through an experiment. Imagine that it's only Croatia to decide upon the fact if Bosnia-Herzegovina is to accede to the European Union tomorrow. And you said that there are 50% against it and 50% think differently. Imagine that you, like I think the economy of Croatia has contracted the last 4 years. Imagine that the promise of Europe, which you are also doubting, is not fulfilling, and it might go on like that. And the next election would bring an even far stronger right into the government. Now, if you go through this experiment, then you know that Croatia, in the Council of Ministers, in the next election, in the next voting round, will vote against Bosnia-Herzegovina. But on the other side, Bosnia-Herzegovina could now receive a strong help from those people sitting in the saddle in really not making the case that they get in quicker with less obligations, but helping them actually break the spell about a very simple issue that you and I know, and then to really push for them to come in and from inside, because we know that the problem about, this decision about Sejdić-Finci is directly targeting the heart of a compromise of the Dayton Agreement and even of the Washington Agreement, and about the Croatian minority or majority or whatever you want to call it, and the people and them being represented in the presidency. So here is actually only one country which can really help, and that's Croatia. By breaking the spell of that thing, you would actually open at once the possibility for Bosnia-Herzegovina to negotiate.
Anyone else?
Right. Anyone who thinks of Bosnia-Herzegovina as permanent state rather than transitory and questionable in terms of its existence, I think not only in Croatia but elsewhere, should see advantages of Bosnia-Herzegovina membership into the European Union. For as long as no country of the European Union has collapsed or disintegrated, and so far we don't have any example of that, the membership in the European Union is a huge thing in support of any country, and especially of a so complex country with such a terrible, tragic recent history. remaining united as one country. So therefore, I think, and ethnic secessionists in Bosnia and Herzegovina know that. And actually, if you ask who is opposing Bosnia and Herzegovina's moving towards the European Union, within Bosnia and Herzegovina and elsewhere, you would see those who calculate that this country should not and will not and cannot survive. And so I think really you would find certainly in Croatia some of these people, and just as you would in Bosnia and in Serbia and in other countries. But I think the fact that a country is a member of the European Union offers additional layer of support and for the independence, for the integration, territorial integrity and political integrity of that country. And I think we should really support Bosnia in that way. Of course, the basis is that Bosnia and Herzegovina citizens want that. And I think this comes first, really, because I feel that actually, other countries, especially neighboring countries who wish well to Bosnia and Herzegovina, have an obligation even to do as much as we can to stabilize and make this country prosperous in a way, and not being permanently questionable by, whether they will survive or anything like that. Yeah? So I think that's one thing. And when it comes to economic benefits, Croatia has lost economically because it has left CEFTA. We also feel that if there is a permanent border between Croatia and Bosnia, and if this border gets tough as an EU border, there will be some additional losses, I would imagine. And then also Croatia now has an exclave, which is Dubrovnik. Dubrovnik is a domestic political issue. It's becoming a domestic political issue for the first time now. Citizens who live in Dubrovnik, in order to get to other parts of Croatia, as EU citizens, they would need to cross the EU, non-EU border, because there are 40 kilometers in between. This is Bosnian territory, and you can't actually move from one part of Croatia to another part of Croatia without showing passports twice. And we don't want, for domestic reasons, this border to be tough. But I don't think Croatia should single out Bosnia as the only country that we would want to see member of the European Union. So therefore, I'm thinking of a much wider region, actually, of treating Bosnia as any other country of the Western Balkans, and therefore, if not at the same time, then certainly in a coordinated way, and certainly with a clear promise that they will all join at some point. Unless, obviously, they express desire not to join, which I so far haven't seen, at least not with the EU. With NATO we see some doubts, but not with the EU. Yeah. And I think the strategic thinking needs to really be taken seriously into account. The European Union and the decision on accession is not only economic. Had it been economic, we wouldn't have accepted any country. I would imagine ever, because it always costs something, and neither Germany would accept East Germany to join the European Union overnight without any accession. And it's not, at the moment, it doesn't seem to be doing badly. East Germany, former East Germany, that is, yeah. To join the European Union overnight, I don't propose that to any country. That would be very dangerous as a precedent, I think. It's unthinkable as a precedent. But I think really we don't need longer accession, I think.
Is there any other question?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Perhaps you're all too tired, but the Americans have an expression for everything, So this white elephant expression, something in the room and no one is talking about, And obviously this is the issue of the Albanian population in this region living in several states, and with strong demographic differences between the Slavic population and the Albanian population in the region. So, not to them, because he's been speaking too much, but to the rest of the audience, of the panel, starting perhaps with Biljana, how do you see this, again, divergence in demographics and convergence in borders, perhaps at one stage?
Thank you for the question, because at first I thought you would ask for the name issue, because it is another elephant in the room, and we never tackled that, especially while I was listening to Dejan speaking about these good intentions toward Bosnia and then its integration. I had in mind the bizarre dispute over Macedonia. As for the Albanian population, It is, to be honest, analyzing the statements of the leading politicians of the Albanians in Macedonia, in Kosovo, and in Albania, especially during the centennial of their statehood some years ago. There was an impression of some kind of different understanding